want to increase their bounty on as goods. Fine. In order to attach to what it is they have. And when they want more and more and more, and they think that's the purpose of human existence, and that's why government exists, is to give them every free goodie imaginable, then obviously they don't own what they think they do. They're owned by those things. And they don't want to lose them because they don't want to make any sacrifices. They don't want the cross. They don't want to die to self. They don't want to be mortified. So Catholics became very busily involved because of this overt persecution in the Democratic Party as the upward means of political mobility, of upward socialization as it's called. That with the persecution in the world of overt anti-Catholicism by the Masons, by Republicans, Democrats, for their own opportune political purposes, just like today, they want all of the illegal immigrants that come in, and they want them to vote as soon as possible, even though they might still be illegal. They'd even naturalized American citizens because it's a means of getting more votes. And Catholics latched on to the Democratic Party as the means of being able to advance materially, politically, economically in the world. Now, this wasn't the case with every single bishop in the United States or every single Catholic, but it was with a lot. So much so that by the First World War, Woodrow Wilson, when he was president, Thomas Woodrow Wilson, former governor of New Jersey, when Woodrow Wilson became president, this virulent anti-Catholic, and he was a virulent anti-Catholic, called in James Cardinal Gibbons, the longtime Archbishop of Baltimore from 1877 to 1921, and he was an Americanist, and believed in the American way. He believed in ecumenism before there was ecumenism. And James Cardinal Gibbons was called in by Woodrow Wilson, who just a year before had met with a Father Clement Kelly, who would later become the Bishop of Oklahoma City. And he had told Father Kelly, as the Catholics are being persecuted in a violent way by the Masonic revolutionaries in Mexico, that in essence, and I'm paraphrasing now, it's in my book, and President Wilson said to Father Kelly, he said, well, I have no doubt that these terrible things in Mexico that you have reported have occurred. But terrible things, perhaps even more terrible things, occurred in the French Revolution. And out of that bloodletting came the liberal ideas which dominate in so many countries today, including our own. Perhaps some such good may yet come from the bloodletting in Mexico. In other words, out of the bloodletting of Catholics in Mexico will come more liberal ideas. This man hated Catholics. Gibbons, after the American involvement in World War I, wanted to show American Catholic patriotism. Patriotism, true Catholic patriotism, is love of one's country, which is part of our duty in both the divine positive law and the natural law, the fourth commandment. But what is true love of one's country? True love of one's country is to will her good, the ultimate expression of which is her Catholicization. It's not nationalism, my country right or wrong. No, that is not patriotism. That is making an idol out of the nation. It's a violation of the first commandment. Nationalism, the idolization of the nation, on all of the national myths, is the worship of a false god. It's God first, through his Catholic Church, and then our nation. And of course, our parents, our spouses, our brothers and sisters, our children, our grandchildren, whatever. We love God first, be loved before we love any other creature. Any created thing. We love God before we love our nation. And we love our nation for love of God, who wants her Catholicization. Gibbons, though, wanted to please Wilson and to demonstrate Catholic loyalty to the country in the midst of World War I, which was an unjust war, prodded by all of the nationalistic goals of various formerly Catholic countries of Europe who were warring against each other. There were no legitimate national security interests that required the United States to be involved in World War I. Except Wilson believed he could remake the world in the image of the United States. We saw how well that worked because it helped to produce World War II. and for the problems that we've had ever since. But Wilson, who had such contempt for the church that he called Cardinal Gibbons Mr. Gibbons, couldn't even call him by his ecclesiastical title, was the Prince of the Catholic Church, called him Mr. Gibbons. And he wanted to see whether Catholics would be loyal. So Gibbons proposed ultimately that the bishops of the United States would form what was called the National Catholic War Council. And the National Catholic War Council was designed to support the effort of the United States in World War I, the terrible war, the first modern war. It was really the last balance of power war of the 19th century, fought in the early 20th century with early 20th century technology. There was, of course, gas warfare, the first aerial combats, the misery of trench warfare, and the horror, the stench of the trench warfare. All of the horrible horrors of World War I, and all of the engendering of the bitterness that would lead to many of the causes of World War II. And the Vatican ultimately said, well, all right, you want to organize, but we're not comfortable with the idea of National Catholic War Council. So the name was changed to the National Catholic Welfare Council, NCWC. And from the very beginning, the NCWC was essentially an arm of the left wing of the Democratic Party. Now their salvation, see, liberalism and conservatism are simply two sides of the same naturalist coin, believing that human beings can find some way to solve the problems of the world absent Catholicism. That's in a nutshell. They're just two different sides of the same diabolical coin. But the NCWC, from the very beginning, was devoted to the propagation of statism, of the statism of Woodrow Wilson. He was a collectivist, he was a statist. It was under his presidency that there was the Federal Reserve System and the federal income tax, all of these things. And during World War I, there was the suppression of dissent. And those who criticized Wilson were sent to jail for various reasons. Senator Hiram Johnson from California said that it is now illegal to criticize the President of the United States for any reason whatsoever. And by 1932, with the election of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, an out-and-out Freemason, most of the American bishops of this country believed in the programs of the New Deal, which were nothing other than social engineering, rank redistribution of income, and without any moment of a reflection that they were supporting policies in violation of the natural law principle of subsidiarity, that human problems are to be resolved in the institution closest to the family and closest to the person in need, starting with the family. If the family couldn't do it, then perforce it would be the parish or the diocese, and as a last resort, the civil government that is closest to the individual in need. But as a result of the social engineering of Franklin Roosevelt and of the Roosevelt administration's alliance with Margaret Sanger and the Birth Control League, which became Planned Parenthood, the forces of eugenics were set loose in this country, and also obviously in the world. And one cannot underestimate it, understate this importance, because it ties directly into the issue of the contraception insurance mandate and the alleged shock on the part of the American bishops. They realize that Barack Hussein Obama is a creature of their lifelong adherence to American political parties as a means of solving American problems in the pluralistic nation. And by the 1930s, contraception was being propagated by all manner of so-called educators and social scientists and anthropologists. And even in 1931, the Washington Post, in an editorialized as follows. We'll close with this and pick it up in the next presentation. The Federal Council of Churches, that is a Protestant organization in America, some time ago appointed a committee on marriage and the home, which has now submitted a report favoring a careful and restrained use of contraceptive devices to regulate the size of families. The committee seems to have a serious struggle with itself in adhering to Christian doctrine, while at the same time indulging in amateurish excursions in the field of economics, legislation, medicine, and sociology. The resulting report is a mixture of religious obscurantism and modernistic materialism. This is in the Washington Post, ladies and gentlemen, which departs from the ancient standards of religion and yet fails to blaze a path towards something better. The mischief that would result from an attempt to place the stamp of church approval upon any scheme for regulating the size of families is evidently quite beyond the comprehension of the pseudo-scientific committee. It is impossible to reconcile the doctrine of the divine institution of marriage with any modernistic plan for the mechanical regulation of human birth. The Church must either reject the plain teachings of the Bible or reject schemes for the scientific production of human souls. Carried to its logical conclusion, the committee's report, if carried into effect, would lead to the death knell of marriage as a holy institution by establishing degrading practices which would encourage indiscriminate and widespread immorality. The suggestion that the use of legalized contraceptives would be careful and restrained is preposterous. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we arrive at our situation today. Americans having accepted contraception in the 1930s and thereafter, and many Catholics adopting it in the 1960s because the conciliar church said they were opposed to it, but didn't adopt any sanctions against those who practiced it. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, have created the monster which is strangling them today. And the solution, my friends, is Catholicism as we trust in Our Lady to lead us to the social reign of Christ the King. When we pray our rosaries as we exclaim, Viva Cristo Rey. Thank you.